Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you another review, and as you can tell, it's another entry in I Love the 80s. Now this is a film I've been meaning to revisit for a while, and was scanning through Netflix one night, saw it on there, decided to watch it. I actually watched this twice this week, because another night I had another watch, so I watched it again. As you can tell up there, it's the 1985 film Clue, based on the board game of the same name. That is right. You heard me right. I said based on the board game. Now, out of all the board games I can think of off the top of my head, this is probably the one that you could actually make a decent film out of. And the film is decent. And that kind of goes into its rating. It has a 7.2 on IMDb, an 88 with the audience, so it does have a pretty good audience despite the fact that it flopped when it first came to the box office. So I guess you could call it a cult film. And it has a 62 with the critics, so critics to a point liked it as well. Now, while Clue is currently a Hasbro property, at the time it was owned by a different company. In the US it was licensed to Parker Brothers, and in the years since Hasbro bought it up, so I guess they figured out it's popular, might as well do another one. In the last couple of years, they've been actually thinking of remaking this film, which I'm glad. From what I heard, that remake has been put on hold indefinitely. I hope it's suspended, because this is one of those films that you just can't remake. The magic was captured the first time, and it's not just because of the writing. This is one of the ones where the cast also helps, which I will get to. Now, the film is directed by Jonathan Lynn, and according to what I'm reading here, this was his first theatrical film. He didn't direct another film for 5 years, which I'm guessing is because of how this film performed at the box office. After that, he directed Nuns on the Run. Then followed that up with My Cousin Vinny, which I've heard a lot of good things about it, but I've only seen a handful of scenes. Then The Distinguished Gentleman, a couple other films. The only other film of note in the 90s is Sergeant Bilko, which is a film I haven't seen in a while, but I remember having fun with it. And he also directed The Whole Nine Yards, and the last film he directed was 3 years ago, and that was Wild Target. He's a director that knows how to use the camera, which this film does kind of show how he knows how to use the camera, and he did an excellent direction job, especially with how wacky this film is in its last act. The movie was produced by Debra Hill, which I did not know, and part of that is because until recently, I'd never watched this film in its entirety. I'd seen it a couple times over the course of several years, but it would only be on TV. I never owned the DVD until recently, but I don't know where it is. I think it's in one of the things. No, I'll go look for it. But it would always be past a certain part when I would come across it, flipping through channels like, no, nothing's on, I'll just watch the rest of the movie. It always was usually past one of the first couple murders, so I knew someone got killed, but I never really got to see them and all the setup to it. So watching this movie on Netflix was the first time I actually got to see all the setup to everything, and it actually made the rest of the film that much more fun. Now, the film stars Tim Curry as Wadsworth, Eileen Brennan as Mrs. Peacock, Madeline Kahn as Mrs. White, Christopher Lloyd as Professor Plum, Michael McKean as Mr. Green, Martin Mull as Colonel Mustard, Lesley Ann Warren as Miss Scarlet, Colleen Camp as Yvette, and Lee Ving as Mr. Body, our murder victim, which if you've played the game, you know that's not really a spoiler, so I don't have a problem saying that. Now, the film is set in 1954, which you can kind of get that from a few things, like there's a real brief thing of the McCarthy hearings in the background, also the way people are dressed, and also how they talk about communism kind of gives it away, but nothing states the exact year. Now, it starts with 6 strangers being invited to a party at a secluded New England mansion. They are all greeted by Wadsworth at the door, and he addresses them by their pseudonyms, and if people don't know what that word means, it means an alias. It's usually used when a writer does it, but it's used here too. Now, they talk and have banter during dinner, and they all realize that all of them work or live in Washington, D.C., and around this time is where Mr. Body, the 7th attendee, arrives. It's at this point that Wadsworth reveals the true nature of the party. All the guests are being blackmailed, and Mr. Body is their blackmailer. And all of this blackmail is very juicy. Like, for instance, Professor Plum was a psychiatrist who lost his license because he had an affair with a female patient. Mrs. Peacock is the wife of a senator who is accepting bribes to deliver her husband's vote. Something that is still very prevalent nowadays. I know the senators and bribes to deliver their vote is, but I don't know how many of them have their wives collect the bribes for them. And this one kind of just showed the time. Still might be a little prevalent depending on where in the country you live now. Mr. Green is gay, and the secret would cost him his job with the State Department. Each of them has juicy secrets like that, so you can see why they're paying the money. Now when they find out Mr. Body is the guy blackmailing them, they react like how you naturally would. Like, a couple of them slap him, one of them goes at him, one of them knees him in the groin. Well, he eventually gives them weapons and offers them his silence in exchange for them killing Wadsworth, because Wadsworth apparently had called the cops and they would be there, because apparently he called them all together so they could confront Mr. Body and have him arrested for blackmailing. And as we find out, it's because he too was a victim. At least that's what he says, because there's multiple endings, which I'll get to in a little bit. Now, Mr. Body turns the lights off, a gunshot's heard. When it comes on, Mr. Body's dead, but it's not because of the wound. Now, after a while, we find out he wasn't dead, then he's dead. And after that, it becomes like a whodunit, more than the fact that Mr. Body's lying dead on the floor, because a couple of other people turned up dead. A couple of them are the people in the house, like the cook, and other people are people that wander in the house, like a cop, a stranded motorist, and even a singing telegram girl. I'm not going to spoil the context of their scenes, but a lot of them are funny, especially the singing telegram girl. Now, like in the board game, they wander through the house looking to see where they can find their secret passageways galore. But the core part of the film is the characters and their interaction with one another. And that's what makes this film so fun, is because how the actors do the performances. They're very subtle in the beginning, but as the night wears on and more people end up dead, they become more energetic. And I guess you could say a little over the top, but for some of the situations it fits, like when they first discover Mr. Body's body after they thought he was dead and they find out he wasn't dead. The reaction from them, it's very nice to see. And of course, for some of them, like Curry, I know was a stage actor, so it's obvious he's going to do something like that when he deems it necessary. I don't know about the rest of them, but I know the rest of them are good actors, so they probably did the same thing. Now, it was shot at Paramount Studios on sound stages, except for a couple scenes, like an establishing shot and a shot in a ballroom. But you can definitely tell it was filmed on a set, but it's a very good set. And of course, the film has multiple endings, and apparently this was developed by John Landis. And I can say that this kind of works for the film, because since it's based on a board game, and I've never actually played this board game personally, so I don't know how the ending is chosen, if it's influenced, but I'm guessing somehow the ending changes from game to game. How, I don't know. Like I just said, never played it. So doing multiple endings actually fits. I know on the VHS version of the game, and obviously on the Netflix version, they play it one after another. That's how it could have happened. Here's another one, and then this is how it really happened. Whereas on the DVD, you could select it to either do that or just play a random ending like they would do in theaters. Like, I know in the papers they would say, the movie's going to be showing ending A, ending B, ending C. All endings are fun, but I have to say my favorite of the three endings is ending B. And that's the one where we find out that I'm not going to spoil who it was, but that one's just my favorite for some. There's just something about it. Maybe it's because of one of the moments at the end involving Mr. Green. C is also a pretty good ending. It has probably one of the funniest moments at the end of it, too. But they all diverge from one point, which I'm not going to spoil, but it is interesting to see the build-up to this. Apparently there were more endings. They were going to film an ending where each character did it, which it would have been nice for them to film that. Of course, it'd be kind of hard to put on the VHS thing. It would have made the movie too long. It would probably been like, alright, this is getting a little dragged on, but it would have been nice. I know they filmed another ending that they did not put on the DVD as far as I know, except maybe a single picture, but it would be funny to see that one, even if it is kind of have a dark take. As for how the actors are, Tim Curry Very great as Wadsworth shows a lot of his range in this performance. He's very subtle and very gentlemanly at the beginning. Then he slowly starts to go into his over-the-top stage persona, especially at parts where he's like doing the whole unraveling and other bits. And then, of course, in one of the endings, he gets to show how much of a bastard he can be. Because in one of the endings, he's a bad guy. I'm not going to say which one and how, but it just shows it. And, of course, because of that, it adds to one of my movie rules. Never trust Tim Curry when you see him in a movie. Because every movie, he always turns out to be a bad guy. Granted, it's only in one ending in this one, but it still happens. He's either a bad guy or a jerk. Eileen Brennan as Mrs. Peacock. You know, type of socialite character that the Peacock is. She does a good job as it. And, of course, for one of the endings, makes you want to smack her. Granted, she gets smacked already in the film, but those of you who've seen the movie know what I'm talking about. Madeline Kahn as Mrs. White. She's kind of stoic in her performance, but with how the character seems to be, it kind of makes sense. There's a couple times where she is a little emotional, but she's mostly stoic, which I'm guessing is part of her outward appearance to make people not suspect her, but because she's accused of being a Black Widow, which, as the film goes on, I guess you could see more likely is true. And it is kind of funny that her name is Mrs. White and she's dressed like she is in mourning, which I'm guessing she still is. So it is kind of funny to see it. Her like this. Christopher Lloyd is Professor Plum. He does an excellent job. If you've seen Lloyd's work, you know how he is, and he brings some of that to this character, but also a little subtleness. And his character is also a pervert. I never noticed this until, of course, I saw the beginning, and it made the whole sleeping with his patient thing make a lot more sense. He is kind of a pervert. Michael McKean is Mr. Green. He did a good job here. His character being gay doesn't really play into a lot of his character development, except for a couple scenes, like when he first reveals it, then he looks at Professor Plum. I think it's Professor Plum. Forget who. I think it might be him, or if it's someone else, forgive me. But then the character gets up, and then of course, at one point in one of the endings, he does kind of have a flamboyant voice when he says something before he gets slapped, which that's the moment in the second ending that I really do like. And then of course the thing about aren't people like you usually called fruits, and it's also this plays into the joke of the ending C, which I'm not going to spoil. Martin Mull does a great job as Colonel Mustard. You really believe him as an ex-military guy or a current military guy, because I don't know. I don't know if he's supposed to be retired or just doesn't go out in uniform that much. I'm going to guess maybe semi-retired, but he did an excellent job, especially for the one monologue you mentioned about how he made all his money. Lesley Warren as Miss Scarlet did a great job as this type of character, because she's basically a madam character, kind of given away with how she talks and how she dresses, and she did an excellent job. Colleen Camp as Yvette. She did a good job for what the character's supposed to be, especially when we find out it's all supposed to be a ruse. Now her French accent sounds a little fake, which is find out later it actually is fake. So I guess it kind of makes sense you're gonna do a fake accent, but it does add a little bit to the humor in a couple scenes. Lee Ving as Mr. Body he did a great job. He just makes you want to punch him the moment you see him. You're like, no wonder somebody killed him. The rest of the cast: Bill Henderson as the cop, Jane Weidland as the singing telegram girl, and Jeffrey Kramer as the motorist. They all did a good job for what they had to do, especially if they're only in a few scenes. And if there's anything else to say, it's kind of sad that this film did flop when it came out. It was made for $15 million, which this is 85, $15 million, which that would probably be like a medium-sized budget for that era. And considering all the people in the movie, it's like, whoa, it was made for that. If this film was made a couple years later, it probably would have been double that at least, just from Curry and Lloyd alone. But who knows, it might have still been the same price, maybe just a couple million higher. It only made $14.5 million, a little bit over that, so it didn't even break even, which is sad, but at least it got to life on home video. If it only had I don't remember what's on the DVD, but I think it's only has like a featurette or something, but I could be wrong. It'd be nice if they did a bigger special edition, got all the actors together who are still alive, and have them talk about their thoughts on the film, maybe even a commentary if there isn't one, with Lynn and maybe a couple of the actors, or maybe even showing that lost ending if it still exists. Any other thing to talk about? Oh yeah, the score by John Morris. It really does fit the tone of this film, especially the little bit in the beginning is kind of creepy, which kind of fits the vibe of the opening scene, which I will say up until Mr. Body dies, the film is kind of slow, which, you know, watching it the first time I'm like, man, this movie really just starts slow, but then once he dies it picks up pace a little bit, which I think kind of, some people might think that the tones clash a little bit, but I think that adds to the humor of it, that you think it's going to be an uber serious film, and then it turns into a film that's slightly serious, slightly comedic, which I guess is why the film, at least in my opinion, works, because it's a comedy mystery. So it still does have that little bit of seriousness there, but the comedy adds to it and, I guess you'd say, cuts the levity like a knife. Anything else to say about this film? Not really. It's a fun film. What is my rating for it? My rating for Clue, I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. If you like comedy mystery films and you haven't seen this film and you're a fan of, you know, Curry, Kahn, Lloyd, or a couple of the other actors, it's definitely a film I say you should watch at least once. If there's anything else I have to say, it's just probably one of my favorite lines in the film. Communism is just a red herring.